reconvening, and the first thing up on the agenda is the Mental Health Subcommittee recommendations. And Amanda's going to present.
That'd be great.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda J. Marshall, as explained at the last meeting. I'm a member of the Subcommittee for People with Mental Illness. I co-chair with Patrick Nolan. And I did a presentation on our recommendation, but I'm going to do a brief recap since we're at a new meeting. The story behind our recommendation has to do with Andre Gladen. He was an individual who was killed by police in the middle of mental health crisis. He had no weapons. He was just in the middle of crisis. We heard from his sister, Donna Martin, who came to one of our meetings, and she told us about what had happened after he died. She let us know that it was really difficult for them because they didn't know what had happened. They had a meeting with Ted Wheeler and Daniel Outlaw where they received an apology, but it felt half-hearted to them. I'm going to come back to that. They were coming into Portland a little later to see if the officer would be criminally indicted for his actions. On their way into Portland, his mother, who has medical conditions, it's very difficult for her to travel. On her way into Portland, they got a phone call from an assistant district attorney letting them know that the officer was not going to be indicted. They didn't even get all the way to Portland. They got a phone call in a car that this officer was not going to be pursued for his actions. So at that meeting, we asked Ms. Martin what it was that she would like to see. And she told us that what she would like to see would be a sincere apology or condolence from the chief of police and the mayor, perhaps, and not in a way that the police would be taking liability, but just in a way that acknowledges that there was a human life lost. That was someone's son, that was someone's brother, someone's dad, uncle, whatever. And he leaves behind a family who loves him and a community who knows him. And whatever the circumstances were, that's a life lost. And we would be asking that the chief of police would send let me get back into so this is our actual recommendation. We would ask for it to be bureau practice, that 24 hours after a use of lethal force, for the bureau to send a written letter of condolence. And I use that word very specifically. We are not asking for the chief of police to tell us that their officers did something wrong. We're not asking them to say, oh yeah, we should never have done that. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for an acknowledgement of loss and of grief. And then within 48 hours, for them to offer a meeting with family members, and this would be to recognize and acknowledge the family members' grief and loss. This is one of the things that Ms. Martin had told us that she would really have liked, and she'd had that meeting but didn't feel that the apology or condolence that they got was wholehearted. She had said to us that they told her, I'm sorry this had to happen. And that was very triggering for her. So what we're asking is for something along the lines of, I'm sorry that this happened, your son's life matters, your loss matters, and we're going to do everything in our power to stop this from happening to someone else. Not that we're asking them to quote that, but something along those lines. Another piece is that there's no transparency if there's no actual change. So we're asking for a concrete change. We're not dictating what that concrete change is because I'm not sure what the police bureau would have to say about that or what kinds of things they can do. But what we are asking for is that whatever change it is that they do make, that be carried out with transparency to the surviving parties so that they know what's happening and how it's happening. but not necessarily dictating what that change would be. So I think that's the recap.
Thank you. PCEP members have some input?
Have you guys talked to the chief and the mayor about this?
No, our recommendation would be what would go to them.
Have you consulted with legal? With the city attorney?
No, this is a recommendation to PCEP, and then it goes from there.
What's that?
It's a recommendation to PCEP, and PCEP votes yes or no, and then it goes on past that, not the other way around.
Right. But if I recall, when I brought recommendations, some of the stuff that I had to go back and touch base with people that worked with the city about some of the recommendations. Do you guys remember that? So I'm just wondering if you guys have had those conversations.
I think the question is like on protocol, right?
Right.
Like have you talked to them about like what their protocol is, or like if they could even do this?
Right.
So I recall the questions, the recommendations that you offered were completely different in format than this one. This one is directly to the PCEP to pass to those positions, not ask, it has nothing between. Sorry.
Can I clarify? So is this a recommendation for PCEP to move forward and allow for a further analysis of the recommendation?
No, this is a recommendation for PCEP to vote yes or no and then pass it up,
Okay.
up the food chain.
To the Bureau for the chief to submit a letter.
To make a recommendation for that, yes.
Right. Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
The term, when there's any use of force, is he talking about deadly force?
We talked about deadly force, and then we also talked about force that cause serious injury. I can't remember
Okay.
exactly what our phrase
Does that
was.
include like an active shooter? If an active shooter gets taken out by the police, there has to be an apology?
So this was something that came up after the meeting at the last hearing, and through discussions just with a couple of our subcommittee members that were there, it sounded like that would need to be something that's differentiated, but not for this particular recommendation.
Right. So what my concern is there's some things that I think are missing that could be misinterpreted for as a recommendation. It seems really broad. I feel like it needs to be honed. I mean, that's my
We're purposely keeping it broad because we don't know what they can do. We don't know what the police bureau will allow. We don't know. So we were purposely trying to keep it narrow enough to give our recommendation, but broad enough because we're not dictating what it is that they'll do.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? Steve, are you getting at the idea that maybe the recommendation would be appropriate in certain uses of deadly force and less appropriate in other potential uses of deadly force, and that we should try to sort of dig further into that question before saying yes to something like this?
Yeah, I think it's too broad of a recommendation. That's my opinion. I think attorneys would probably
I think
pretty much shut it down. So if we gave a better recommendation, maybe it has a better chance of actually making through that system.
I think
Maybe coming to the next SPMI meeting to ask the community that this directly affects what they feel about that might be a good choice.
I think this goes back to Sam's thing, though. He was saying about if you had consulted with the city and asked them, like, what is their current policy on this? And then that would, because I think that's the question.
That's not my understanding of how this process works.
Yeah, we'd like to remove it from the,
Say it again?
we'll remove it. Thanks. We'll just go elsewhere.
Yeah, we're just going to withdraw our recommendation. Thank you.
Say your last part again.
This was a recommendation from our entire committee, and we're not looking for amendments. And so if the committee wants to amend this, then we will withdraw our recommendation.
Okay.
I appreciate that. I would like to say one thing. I think in the work that we're doing here and bringing, a learning and teachable moment for me when I brought recommendations forward was the concern that we heard from community members and from other PCEP staff, and I took that to be very valuable in going back and trying to amend the recommendation so that we could bring the right piece forward. So I think it's important for us to keep an open mind and be open to feedback and amendments so we can have the best recommendations.
I really like the recommendation. I understand I've had a lot of folks killed by the police. Like Kendra James used to live with me. That was a human being. These people are human beings, regardless of the circumstances. I like the recommendation, and I also like the fact that a grief counselor be made available to the family members.
Thank you. I spoke with Jason over here, who's part of our little subcommittee bubble over here. And he suggested maybe we have you vote, and if you do not vote to pass, then we will withdraw our recommendation.
Yeah, no, only thing I would say is I think that just be open to amendments or things like this, because I think overall it's a good recommendation. So just
Absolutely.
like a couple small pieces that could just be like tweaked.
Sure. I think our concern is that it will just stall. It's already gone a month.
And I think they put a substantial amount of work into this and spoke with somebody directly affected by this, their family. And they did a lot of work in their subcommittees, in which I can't lie, I didn't show up to. They brought this last month and time ran out. They're bringing it back this month. I'm for it.
I just say, I'm not really able to vote if we are able, but what I would say, and I think it's sticks true to Sam's statement, I think he brought up a recommendation, and there was a lot of feedback to that, and then the PCEP developed a PCEP recommendation outline for policy recommendation, which would answer some of the questions I think some of us have as far as a further analysis of the recommendation. I would agree that it's a really good recommendation, and I think there's a lot more information needed as far as what practices around other communities and engaging communities that are peripherally impacted, along with the person who's been impacted directly.
So is there a process for that? Because that just sounds like it's going to take a lot more time.
Do we have any more PCEP comments? But let's open the floor to the community.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's
There's no
stalled. I
more.
just think that sometimes the recommendations do take a little time, and this is the first time it's came up here, like for real, right?
No.
Yeah, because last month was way at the way end, but we didn't actually really discuss it. So I think that's just part of the process. It's going to take some time to just like take some feedback, put it in, but I think it's moving forward. And
I don't think we're turned off to feedback necessarily in general. I
Yeah.
think just this, we spent a lot of time on this. We've done a lot of drafts of this. All the questions you're asking have come up in our discussions about it and in our reading of it and the writing of it. And so I'm concerned that all of that is now going to have to happen again. And this took quite a while for us to get to this.
All right. Any more PCEP comments? Public comment on the recommendation?
My name is Joyce Harris. I'm with the Albina Ministerial Alliance Coalition for Justice and Police Reform. And this sounds like deja vu to me. I remember when James Jahar Perez was killed. Derek Foxworth was the chief of police. And Derek, being from the community, knew that family. And he went out and he apologized for what had happened. And he caught hell from the union. I thought it was one of the most decent things that I had seen a police chief do. And I thought it was right. And so I would hope that you all don't get so caught up in process that things just kind of drag along and along and along. Is this the right thing to do? Is this the moral thing to do? It's not asking the city to accept ownership for a deadly force encounter that results in either serious injury or death. It's just an acknowledgement that you have a family, a community that's hurting. I mean, I remember when Kendra James was killed. That was very painful. Tony Stevenson, same thing. And it would not take any skin off anybody's back for somebody to say, we are so sorry that this happened. So I hope that you all really think about this and see how this can move things forward. I think it would be a plus for the PCCEP in terms of your credibility with the community, because you don't want to be perceived as just another committee or another body that spends a lot of time saying, well, we gotta think about this, we gotta talk. You begin to sound like people who we don't totally respect or trust. So I think this is an opportunity for you all to really look as if you are doing the right thing, even though there may be people at the city level who don't agree. At least the community would feel that you are really thinking about the aftermath. There's a whole thing called the aftermath of a serious situation. And often what happens in the aftermath is people go in so many different directions, they forget that there are people, there are families, there are communities that are hurt when a community member is lost. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
My name is Donna Hayes. I'm the grandmother of Quantus Hayes, killed February 9th, 2017. Okay, to date, I hurt. Sometimes I pick up a picture, I look at that picture and say, he should have been alive. While everybody's sitting here debating on what should be done, what shouldn't be done, I represent a group of women and men who have lost family. While everybody's sitting here debating, well, we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that. What about those families that's suffering? And I mean suffering. It's hard for me to stand here and talk clearly without tears about the fall. Think about this. You're here to bring them to this. They need to step up and come to the community. They're supposed to be representing the community. But right now, the community is at odds. And we like to know, where do you fit in that? Are y'all gonna join the be at odds? And people can say, what's the use of having you all? Because you're sitting here, let's think about this. Let's think about this. Sometimes people need to make a stand. I'm standing here making a stand. I stand in front of the city, the courthouse, both in Clackamas and in Mount Norma, making a stand. Because I know of hurt people, including myself, including my whole family. It wasn't that they took him away from me, they took him away from his mother. It was the whole family. We're talking about family in Florida, Colorado, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, Michigan. So don't wait all day to make a stand. Think and see, who do you represent?
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mark Shore. I'm a member of the Subcommittee on Mental Illness. And I just, one thing I wanted to encourage the committee to read the document carefully. We did put a lot of work into it, and there are phrases in here that any city attorney could use to exempt an active shooter from it. So, for example, encountering a person in need, like Andre, that could be a determination that, okay, we're talking about someone with mental illness. Or later on, and acknowledge any preventable death or serious injury. So in other words, if it's necessary, if someone is an active shooter, to take them out, I think that is, that would, be exempt under the qualifications for that. So the subcommittee did not see it as our responsibility to go to the city attorney. We figured we would present it to PCCEP. I wanted to read a letter we got from Rabbi Ariel Stone. I'm also a member of her congregation. To the members of PCCEP, I write this note in support of the recommendation of the Subcommittee for People with Mental Illness that the Portland Police Bureau put in place a process to express condolences with surviving family members and friends after the death of a loved one by police force. As a rabbi, I know the power of such a gesture to support efforts on all sides to go forward after a tragedy. Such a communication of condolence could be structured along the lines of existing formulas already in place and would necessarily express no sense of assessing how or why the tragedy occurred. In the wake of such loss, in the midst of such grief, a personal communication from the Police Bureau is a gesture of respect, the delivery of which could also support the development of useful guidelines to those called upon to be in touch with members of a bereaved family. I hope that the PCCEP will adopt this well-reasoned recommendation. Rabbi Ariel Stone, Congregation Sher Tikva. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dan Handelman with Portland Cop Watch. We wrote to you a little bit about this last month and said that we think it's a generally good idea. We noted that it acknowledges some families might not want an apology. I think that's one of the important issues, especially in light of the discussion that you're having around the quote-unquote active shooter, which I'll come back to in a second. Because families may not want to see the chief in or out of uniform, or the mayor, while they're grieving, and they've just had an unfathomable loss, all right? And there's effective language that they said, they're saying that the city shouldn't say, sorry, this had to happen, because had to happen means it was not avoidable, and most of the time, I'd say any time a police officer pulls their trigger, it's avoidable because they made a decision to pull that trigger. There's nothing that is inevitable about that. So we have to stop that language, had to. Okay, so that being said, it's very troubling to hear somebody trying to differentiate an active shooter from anybody else. If somebody loses their life, it's a horrible thing. Everybody has a family, and everybody is a human being. No matter what they did, they're still a person, and their family deserves, to hear that we're expressing condolences to you. If they don't want to hear it, if they thought that the person acted incorrectly and they don't think that they deserve that, that's the decision the family can make. But the city shouldn't be making value judgments like that. That's very troubling that that's even being discussed. I'm sorry, especially after you're hearing from the families themselves. All that said, we're very supportive of this proposal and what's come forward from the committee. I think that when Bob Dye resigned from this committee to move to another city, that at this point there's only one member of your committee on the subcommittee, and I think that you should think, I think that shouldn't negate their proposal, but I think you should make sure that you staff your subcommittees with multiple members from your committee. And conversely, I think the subcommittee should be open to discussion about their proposal, because somebody from the community might have an idea to add something to it. Somebody from the committee might have something to add to it. There's 13 people on the committee, albeit 2 seats are empty, 2 people are absent, and 1 person can't vote. But there's at least 8 people who can vote on this thing. And it's very powerful to have these discussions, and maybe it'll make it better. But still, given the policy proposals that came forward about we should have body cameras that had no research and no background, this proposal addresses concerns the city attorney might have about being sued if you say I'm sorry. It says condolences, not an apology. It addresses several issues. There's obviously been thought put into it, and it's not just we thought about this and we're throwing it on the table. So I urge you to, both of you, I urge the subcommittee to accept friendly amendments if there are some, and I urge the committee to push forward and vote on this today. Thank you.
Oh, can you come back? I have a question for you about that, Dan. I know, but I want to be able to get them for you. So when you say they don't want an apology, what would you suggest?
If the city doesn't, if the family doesn't want one, the city doesn't have to give it. I mean, I think that's that's the intent of the proposal, that if the family doesn't want it, then the city doesn't have to give it. I mean, they offer it, and then maybe it could be something that if they're open to it, if after a few weeks or months of grieving, and they say, we changed our mind. If you would like to come and talk to us now, they should leave it open so it can happen later down the line. But they don't have to accept it, and that's the whole point. That if there's somebody that does something that's so horrendous that the family doesn't even want to talk about the police shooting, and we've seen that happen. We've seen lots of families who don't want to talk about it. They don't sue the city. They don't cause a ruckus. That'll happen, but that doesn't mean the city shouldn't offer it.
I just want to reiterate something that Dan said that I think is really important, because it sounded like the debate and discussion in this group was about differentiating different situations, and it sounded like some people on the board were hesitant to issue condolences in certain cases, perhaps an active shooter. And I want to say that I agree with Dan that really it should not be the conditions under which someone is shot and killed by the police or killed by the police. The police aim and goal, as I believe the Police Bureau holds, is not to kill people. And so anytime someone is killed, that's a failure. It's a human tragedy, but it's also a failure. The goal should be de-escalation and stopping someone from doing harm to other people, doing harm to themselves. And so I don't think it's actually controversial what the proposal asks for. It just asks for the city to recognize that a failure has occurred, a tragedy has occurred. They're not taking responsibility, saying this person, the police were wrong in doing this. There might be circumstances in which they may have felt there was no choice. But it's just a very easy thing for the city and the police to recognize that a human life was taken. And I think we have to think about the worst case scenario, or the person for whom none of us might have sympathy, and agree that those people too have families, those people too are humans, and it is a tragedy even when those people are killed, and just for the city to recognize that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And according to this, subcommittees can engage non-members, but only members, meaning members of the PCCEP, can vote to approve reports and recommendations forwarded to the full body. When voting, a quorum for the subcommittee member is made of a simple majority of the subcommittee. So I don't understand this process of the subcommittee asking for it to be sent back, because that's not a process that's described here. That once it's turned over to you, it's this committee's recommendation to decide on. So I'm just pointing out what your procedure is that you have agreed on earlier.
So Dan, excuse me, Dan, I'm not sure, Dan, yeah, could you explain that again? I'm having a hard time because the speakers here they're kind of bouncing in the room. So, yeah, if you could just explain that again, please. Thank you.
That's funny, because I can't hear anything any of you are saying either. Okay, what I said is the bylaws say, while subcommittees may engage non-members, meaning people who are not one of the 13 or 8 or 9 of you. Only members can vote to approve reports and recommendations to forward to the full body. So it has to be PCCEP members who vote on that. When voting, the quorum for subcommittee members is a simple majority of the subcommittee, 50% plus 1. So, again, I don't think you should discount this proposal because there's only one current member on the board, but I think that the process says they turn it to you, you decide to vote on it or not. And I don't think it needs to go back to the subcommittee if you want to make a modification. I'm not sure where that policy is coming from the subcommittee. That's not part of your procedures that you agreed on when this body was set up.
Okay, thank you.
I'll try to address that. So that paragraph, it is, I understand that it isn't clear. So it says when subcommittees may engage, while subcommittees may engage non-members, only members may vote to approve reports and recommendations. Members there refers to members of the subcommittee, not members of the PCCEP. So non-members of the PCCEP, anyone in this room, anybody else, you can be a member of one of the subcommittees, take part in subcommittee work, and all of that. What this is saying is that only members of subcommittees can then forward on recommendations to the full PCCEP. That's how we discussed it back when these bylaws were passed. I do acknowledge that it could be clearer, but that is the intent here. And one of the reasons we did that was because we wanted the community to be as involved and invested as possible in the subcommittee work. We do not think we have a monopoly on good ideas simply because we have name tags up here on this table. So that's our intent there.
So, are we ready to move to vote?
Yeah.
Are we voting? I thought we withdrew it.
I would just add that there's no rule that says we can't also amend, and I think there could be a couple amendments that could be added to it.
I do have a couple questions.
I think they did a whole lot of work.
I do have a couple questions. So, do we have a process for how to recommend to the PCCEP for a recommendation?
No.
Well, what
Okay,
the
thank
bylaws,
you.
what the bylaws just said, that's what you did.
Okay, so we don't have any sort of recommendation for how that would happen, right?
No.
Thank you. I think we're still withdrawing this. We haven't spoken to the whole committee, obviously, to discuss that. But I would also like to say that we probably shouldn't vote on any other until we have a recommendation process of some sort.
So in consultation with Jason and Mark, I think we are not withdrawing. If the vote happens and it doesn't pass, then we are taking our recommendation back to us.
I'm sorry, I don't understand. Can you explain that again?
So if the committee votes not to accept our recommendation, then we're going to take it back. We don't want you guys to amend it. We want to just take it back.
We can still make some recommendations on what you could amend.
Sure.
Yeah. And as to your question, I don't know if this was what you're trying to say, Patrick, but I'm going to present a recommendation outline. It's not a process, but it's just like a form to fill out when putting together a recommendation. But as far as like a process of like how it gets voted on.
Okay, I think we should withhold them all until that point then.
Well, it's kind of a process right there in the bylaws in which Andrew just read.
Is there a process for recommendations from subcommittees in the bylaws? No, I don't think so. Is there?
Okay, I think.
Can I say something?
Well, let me just try one thing. What we've tried to do, we've passed many recommendations, right, since we started. And
From subcommittees?
I'm sorry.
From subcommittees?
No.
Yes, that came from subcommittees.
Okay.
Now,
Can you name one?
sure, we passed a series of recommendations about the community engagement plan that came from the settlement agreement policy.
Maybe we should go back and look at them too as well, because we didn't have a process.
Okay. Happy to talk with you after.
And Andrew, can I say something? According So just want to be clear, according to the agenda, it says presentation, discussion, public comment, PCCEP vote, correct? So I want to say that I really appreciate all the public comment, especially for those that have lost loved ones that have been affected. Joyce? I want to thank Joyce. I assume everyone knows as a voice of this community, and I value what you have to say, along with many people in this room, your voice, and the voice of those who have lost someone to violence at the hands of the police. I think this was a needed and important discussion to have, to hear from community members, and we as PCCEP members, we have concerns, we have questions. That's part of the process. Doesn't mean that we've decided or not, but I feel at this point, for us as a body, that we should move forward and vote on this, and I would make the motion to vote on this, and my vote would be yes, that we move forward to recommend to the Police Bureau that they make a public apology when there's a loss of life according to this recommendation. And I want to thank Patrick and the Mental Health Subcommittee and the hard work that's gone into this to bring it forward and for us to have a better understanding. And again, you know, it's really important to have these discussions, to hear the voices, and because that's how we learn. I don't have that lived experience. And so to hear from other people in the community and to hear their voices is impactful and important for me when making a decision. So as a PCCEP member, I would motion that we vote on this, and my vote would be yes.
Final question. Patrick, recommendation still on the table? All right. Let's go to vote. Let's go down the line. Patrick, how do you
Yes.
vote for recommendation?
Yes.
I vote yes.
Yes.
I would abstain. I would make two amendments, and I ultimately agree with that they should make, they should definitely make a condolence, but I just abstain just for a couple things, just to make it stronger. And I also would like to hear from the, what is the current policy. I can still make my, I can still make just my thought. Yeah, I'm just clarifying my vote. I'm clarifying my vote, if I could, please. Thank you. And I would just like to hear on what the current policy is from the city and just PPA about what they can and cannot do. Not that that would ultimately stop me from recommending this, but I just think there's a couple things that could be tightened up on it.
Me? Yes.
Yes.
Steve, can you vote?
Yes, I can vote. I have the same concerns like Anna, and so for those reasons I'll abstain right now. But I'm definitely for a solution that would bring condolences to the families who've lost members of their family because of deadly force.
I think it's 5-2.
It's 6.
6-2? Okay.
So it passes, right? It passes. This is my 50%.
We need 7 for it to pass, and so. We need 7 for it to pass, and we're at 6, and 2 abstentions.
Thank you.
Anybody want to weigh their vote? All right, well, doesn't pass. Sorry for the community who came out.